clear. Check above and all around. I wanted to emphasize the importance of good lookout. Learn the fighter pilot's habit to search for other aircraft. Soon, as I leveled the Chipmunk at a height of around 1,500 feet, and when I asked the cadet if he'd like to take over the flight controls, the answer was immediate. "Yes, please, sir." At this stage, there was a tendency, naturally, for a rookie pilot to over-control, and the Chipmunk would start to lurch around the skies alarmingly. Most of the cadets, though, settled down quite quickly, and then, as the countryside slid past, there was the opportunity to observe the landscape's medley of colours, the soft Suffolk contrasts. Few hills or valleys were evident here, just a patchwork of flat fields with haphazard villages that gently poked and prodded their way into adjacent countryside. On this, the day's first flight, we flew due south towards Dedham Vale and Constable country, although for a contrast, on later flights, I'd head due east to fly in the direction of Ipswich, with Aldeburgh Bay and the North Sea beyond. However, with just 30 minutes of flight time allocated to each cadet, we could not fly far. At an opportune moment, therefore, I'd ask the cadet if he'd like to experience some aerobatics. If there was a positive answer, I'd take over the flight controls again and suggest that the cadet followed through lightly on the controls. I'd demonstrate a modest barrel roll, followed by a loop. Then, if the cadet was not suffering from air sickness, a few more manoeuvres as we headed back to Wattisham for a couple of airfield circuits before landing. After the landing, and while I taxied the Chipmunk back to dispersal, the next-in-line cadet could be seen standing keenly, ready to take over from his colleague. A slick changeover, aided by the ATC officer, meant that I could keep the engine running to save valuable time before proceeding with the next flight. And the next, until at length, as the sky began to herald the first signs of evening, that seat in the rear cockpit of Chipmunk WD-373 began to feel really rather hard. Daybreak came quickly the following morning. Even at the best of times, the sound of the station alert siren was hardly welcome, but the grim racket early on a Monday morning ushered a particularly pestilent start to the week. Gone were the memories of yesterday's Chipmunk Air Experience flights. Now I had to switch swiftly from Air Training Corps volunteer to my everyday job as an English Electric Lightning fighter pilot. As the wail of the alert siren was fading, I dressed hastily, then dashed from the RAF Wattisham officers' mess to the 56 Squadron setup, where the buzz of activity was building up. Engineers rushed here and there to arm and prepare Lightnings for flight. The duty operations officer spoke in earnest, fretful tones on the telephone, while the squadron pilots hurried to change into flying gear before they scrutinized meteorological forecasts, examined and signed necessary documents, and checked procedural updates. The exercise, we learnt, would start with a so-called survival scramble, when all Lightnings in a flyable state would be ordered airborne. The idea was to avoid destruction on the ground by incoming Soviet missiles, a plan which assumed that the missiles would arrive in an orderly fashion within a fairly brief timescale. In view of the Lightning's limited fuel capacity, the timing would be tight indeed. However, as with so much in those frosty Cold War days, dilemmas were varied and many, and some of the suppositions within contingency plans were, to put it politely, a little questionable. Nonetheless, something had to be done, and I suppose that this was the best plan that anyone could dream up. The ramifications of the Cuban crisis of just 4 years previously continued to rumble on. By now, though, President John F. Kennedy had been assassinated, and the Soviets' Nikita Khrushchev was no longer in power, his ineptitude seen by the Soviet Politburo as precipitating the crisis in the first place. As a result of all this, the current relationship between NATO and the Soviets had regressed from a state of mere frostiness.